Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank, episode number 44. My name is Timothy. Zach and Nino, I'll be hosting today, and I've got with me a special pack one, pick one, or I guess we get them on the wheel, right? That's what we're saying. We get you on the wheel. We've got Teld with us. Teld, how you doing today? We were talking some Oblivion today. We were talking some Peasant Cube. How you doing, bud?
I'm good, yeah, and it's it's always nice to get this kind of value on the wheel. You could have pack one, pick one, and instead you get pick 9.
Did you want to talk about the Oblivion remake at all for the people? I don't know like what our audience is into out there, but
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's I've got it on Game Pass, and it's a pretty faithful remaster or remake or whatever you want to call it. Somewhere between those. Like it's not just a graphics update, which they did do that, but they changed some things about how the leveling works and how the some of the wonkier most of the wonky mechanics are still in the game if you've played that game back a million years ago. But they did change the leveling so that you no longer have to do the counterintuitive leveling system. So if you've never played Oblivion, the original, you had to basically make all of your leveling skills, like the major skills, the 7 you have, you pick at the beginning of the game. They start out higher, they level faster, but they're also what determine when you actually level up your character. And there was this weird multiplier system for attributes. So basically it was in your best interest to put a bunch of skills that you could control the level up for, but would otherwise never use as your major skills, so that you could grind out these perfect 5x multipliers for all your stats. And it was super tedious and weird and counterintuitive. And now it's just every skill contributes towards your level ups, and your major skills level up faster. And you get 12 skill points or attribute points, and you can use them on your stats as you see fit. So it's much more intuitive. It means you level up a lot faster, so that's a slight problem. But I think when the problem is the game gives you more stat points for people who play RPGs, it's probably preferable to having to do this weird counterintuitive, put all the bad skills that I don't want to actually use as the skills that are supposed to be my character's defining features. So I think overall that change was a A+ change. So yeah, been generally enjoying it. Combat's tight. You don't have to, like, the magic system still feels like magic. So Oblivion was kind of in between Morrowind and Skyrim before it became like just a full blown, open world adventure RPG like Skyrim, but it's not quite the D&D light with weird RPG dice roll mechanics that Morrowind was. So, it's kind of in that middle ground.
When did the original Oblivion, is that going on like 20 years at this point?
I think so. Yeah. It was out when I was a freshman in high school, so I think it was like 2004, 2005.
Was it OG Xbox, or was that Xbox 360 at that point?
I think it was like a launch title for the 360, or like a very, very early into the 360's lifespan.
Yeah, like I said off air, I've never touched these games, these Elder Scrolls games or anything like that. So I don't really know much about them, but I know I had a buddy who was really into Morrowind when it came out, and then I know Oblivion was like the hotness when it hit shelves. I've heard a lot of people talking about this remaster as well, but I'll get back to some video games in the sign-off for today in the farewell. And you'll probably notice Chris is not with us here today. At this point, Chris had another thing come up this weekend. At this point, I'm going to say Chris is on hiatus until we start off an episode and introduce Chris back. So he's got a lot going on, obviously, in his life. So he'll join us when he's ready to join us. And for now, it's just going to be Teld and I rocking and rolling with this episode. And today we're going to talk about some Prowess-y stuff. Obviously, before we get into that, we want to go ahead and go through all the housekeeping. To the listener, remember the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank podcast is to join our Discord server. Come draft with us, give us your feedback. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals and talk about Cube, Retail Limited, and all things Magic. You can find links to our Discord wherever you're listening to this podcast. And as a personal note here, last year I mentioned a couple times that my little road to 1,000 or whatever, I think I called it, on a few different episodes. And I was really trying to aim for the end of last year to hit 1,000 members in the Discord community, and we didn't get there, but we have had a steady stream of people coming in to the Discord in the first quarter of 2025, and the road to 1,000 is back on. I think we're sitting at something like 930 people, and I would be thrilled if by the end of 2025 we hit that 1,000 mark in the Discord server. So if you are thinking about joining the Discord server, your boy Tim here will get a huge dopamine hit if we get to that number by December 2025. So come join us in the Discord server. It's a great place, obviously, to hang out with other Magic players, talk about retail limited, come cube, you can come play cube with us. That's kind of the whole shtick. So do that for me.
Tim, I do hate to break it to you though, but we are no longer in the first quarter of 2025. I know time is
it's May.
Time is relative, but we're almost the halfway point. Within 30 days, we'll be at halfway through 2025, which is breaking my brain.
You're right. I had to do that on the fly, and I was like, okay, we're in April. It's April. That's the first quarter, right? And then, yeah, it's totally May already. Jesus, time is flying. Plus, I moved back to North Carolina from Washington at the beginning of July, which is less than 2 months from now, which is crazy. I got to take a 48-hour trip to Texas and then to North Carolina. So that is approaching very fast, and I have not packed almost anything. So thanks for the reminder, Teld. But no, you're absolutely right. We're in second quarter, so that means is that we're running out of time to hit that 1,000 mark. So please, if you want to come talk Magic, come join our Discord. Let us hit that 1,000 mark this year. Remember, to all the listeners, of course, you can join our scheduled drafts throughout the week. We have our Peasant Cube draft on Saturday nights. We have our mainline Jank Diver Cube draft on Sunday nights. We have F&M style drafts on Fridays where the players can vote on a cube that they want to play. And we have various guest cubes created by members of our server throughout the week. So there's always plenty to do in the Jank Diver Gaming Discord server. And it's all free, and it's not behind a paywall. There's no Patreon to get into our Discord. You just click the link wherever you're listening to this, and boom, you're part of the Jank Diver Gaming community.
There is a paywall to play, however. Remember, you got to craft your own cards.
Yes, WotC, our deal with WotC is that we have to get enough wild cards out of the ecosystem, or else they'll cut us off of direct challenge. So, those uncommon wild cards and those common wild cards that are just really, really building up in your collection, great place to come craft those. That's a lie, by the way. Maybe there's somebody out there who thinks I'm actually telling the truth. We don't have a maybe I should just disclaimer that's not actually true. We don't have a deal with WotC to get people to use wild cards, but there is a minor wild card restriction for people who don't play a lot of Arena, which can be a bar for our higher level cubes, like the one we're mostly going to discuss today. But that's why we have Peasant Cube. Peasant Cube is just very easy for people to get in on, regardless of how much you play. So check out our socials, Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can occasionally find Teld streaming at twitch.tv/Teld Talks. Have you streamed, or do you stream anything like Oblivion, or is that just like a pastime type thing for you?
I haven't streamed any of it. I've considered it, but it just hasn't really been my wheelhouse. I haven't actually been streaming a ton. I've been super busy here at the end of the year finishing up my certification and stuff at work. But yeah, I'm going to look at that sort of stuff over the summer. But most of the time when I stream is to stream Magic. I think maybe one time I streamed some Marvel Snap or something. But I think 90% of the time or 95% of the time it's been Magic.
All right. Yeah, that's twitch.tv/Teld Talk. So main topic today is going to be Prowess. And in light of that discussion coming up, our single card discussion is going to go to a card that I imagine Teld is going to have a lot to say about. We're going to talk about Mishra's Bauble here. And Mishra's Bauble is obviously a key part of Prowess decks, but also I think people have kind of tunnel visioned themselves into thinking it's almost strictly a Prowess card or an Artifact Matters card or something like that, and it's so much more than that. Mishra's Bauble is so much more than that. So just as a reminder, I think Mishra's Bauble comes from Cold Snap? ? How did we even get Mishra's Bauble on the client? Was that an anthology thing?
It was on the bonus sheet for Brothers.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, it was like Cold Snap or Urza's Saga. It was one of those older, very, very old sets.
Yeah, maybe Cold Snap's not right, but I can see the little icicle symbol on it, I think. So I'm going to lock in Cold Snap, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But reminder, Mishra's Bauble, 0 mana artifact. You don't have to pay for it. It's free. It's obviously great. You tap it, you sacrifice it, you look at the top card of target player's library, and then it has that slow cantrip thing that they used to do back in the day. You draw a card at the beginning of the next turns. That's kind of interesting sometimes with the the Mischievous Mystic type cards, the things that care about you drawing 2 cards per turn. Well, obviously, you usually use Mishra's Bauble during your opponent's turn anyway, but sometimes you'll save the Mishra's Bauble, sack it during an opponent's turn instead of sacking it right away just so that you get your extra card on your turn. But it cantrips at some point. So it's basically a 0 mana delayed cantrip that replaces itself and lets you look at the top card of the library, which, that effect is not exciting or strong or anything, right? Like you're basically just cycling a card to get some information about either the top of your deck or the top of your opponent's deck. But like the reason you play Mishra's Bauble is because it's a 0 mana non-creature spell that replaces itself. It just does so much, right? Like outside of obviously this is an artifact and triggers artifact matter stuff. Like what are the type of things that you're looking at when you see a Mishra's Bauble? What are the type of like synergies that it produces?
Yeah, so I actually was anticipating this, so I started writing out a list of of a bunch of things that you can do with Mishra's Bauble that are all very valuable with it. I guess the most obvious is like an artifact ETB, right? Or sometimes just a permanent ETB. For the purpose of this episode, Prowess, it triggers Prowess for 0 mana, which is fantastic. You can have leave the battlefield triggers because you're able to control when it goes to the graveyard. Also, in line, there are sack cards. So not as many for artifacts, but something like a Mayhem Devil.
Devil, yeah.
Yeah. Leading into that, also, the Descend mechanic from LCI, the Crime mechanic, because it targets your opponent to look at the top card of their library if you have any crime cards. So probably the most playable one would be something like Gissa the Hellraiser or the 3 mana 3/3 that puts a land into play. The name of it is escaping me.
Free Strider Lookout.
Yeah, those are probably the most kind of generically playable crime cards. But being able to trigger those is quite valuable for cards like Treasure Cruise. If you run any of the Delve cards, it allows you to put a free card into your graveyard for those. So there's just a ton of little synergies that you get out of it. Obviously, you can line up your double draw for Mischievous Mystic and things like that. I think the thing is it's just so easy to sneeze and have this card do something. Also, like, another thing is because it's a 0 mana card, it plays super well with impulse draw effects. It's one of the handful of cards that you can potentially hit off of, for example, in more powerful environments, a turn 3 Lelia. Usually that is just going to put a counter on it the turn you play it. But if you hit a Mishra's Bauble, you can actually cast it for free, right? And so there's a ton you can do with this card. And more recently, like for purpose of today too, Flurry, so stuff like Clarion Spirit or Cori-Steel Cutter, it makes it very, very easy to set up the double spell. I think the general consensus of people I've talked to, I think, undervalue this card quite a bit. I think people tend to view it as a very much a synergy card, and in a sense it is. But the thing is that the synergies are so dense that you're going to accidentally do that, and then it just makes your deck better because you get to play a 39 card deck. Like, even if you had 0 cards that actually interacted with this card, being able to have a 39 card deck is quite powerful, right? It does marginally increase the consistency of the rest of your deck. But you're almost always going to have something to do with this, and often you're going to have a lot to do with it, and it's going to be very, very powerful.
Yeah, like if you're a red-black deck and you have Kroxa and Grim Lavamancer, like those are just 2 cards in your deck. You take Mishra's Bauble, you put it in your deck, right? Like even if those are micro synergies or only half of like a real combo, like it's only half of a Grim Lavamancer activation, it's only a fifth of a Kroxa, like it is virtually free. Like obviously it can be a bad top deck if you're literally trying to hit gas, like you just need to hit gas right away. It can be a bad top deck because it doesn't replace itself until the following turn. But most of the time, like that's not going to be the situation you're in with Bauble. And like you said, you don't need profound synergies for Mishra's Bauble to be good. You just need kind of micro synergies floating around. And if I looked at a deck and I was like, okay, I have like 2 things that this works within my deck, I would highly consider Mishra's Bauble. It's not power, right? It's not like I have to take this over everything else under every condition. But you should see Mishra's Bauble in a pack and start to think, what are the things that Mishra's Bauble can work with in my deck? And if the answer is like, oh, this kind of works with like 2 or 3 things going on in my deck, then you should highly consider taking it and putting it in your deck, regardless of what your strategy is. And obviously, if you multiply that to the effect of like, oh, this works with like 10 things in my deck, then it does become like an all-star card. The card type matters, the mana cost matters, the cantrip is the thing that makes it playable, and then all the little micro synergies are the things that pull it together. And
this card is a card that if you're playing red, if you're a red aggressively slanted deck, this card is almost certainly a slam dunk. In constructed formats, we saw this be the linchpin of some of the best draws for stuff like the Izzet Prowess deck. And I think it sort of plays out the same way in Cube. It also helps facilitate a couple of particularly powerful red cards in Dragon Rage Channeler and Unholy Heat. It's a really easy way to get an artifact into the graveyard, which is sometimes difficult to do. And both of those cards, when they're activated, are super, super powerful. It's also, in this case, it's also double synergy with Darcy, right? Because the Surveil 1 for free on the turn you play it means you're again marginally increasing the likelihood that your deck does the thing that it's supposed to do. And that's how I would define Mishra's Bauble. It's not a card that is objectively some sort of haymaker, but it's the kind of card that is subtly super powerful because it increases the likelihood that your deck draws its best draws come up, and it increases the power of those best draws by giving you more triggers for your best cards. And I personally draft this card very highly. I've had to readjust my opinion of it in terms of the metagame of the Cube, though, because other people don't draft it very highly. So you have to take more shots on trying to wheel it because other people don't think this card is very good. And I disagree with them strongly, but also if they're going to let you get it 6th, 7th, 8th pick, like sometimes wheel it, go for that, because that means you could take a really objectively powerful card and then get the free value off the bauble later. But playing a 39 card deck, like I said, playing a 39 card deck is actually just kind of broken in a sense, because you're just much more likely to have all your draws lined up.
Mm-hmm. And we're getting to the inevitable fetch land episode at some point, I'm sure, but like this does play well with your own fetches, right? Where you can peek at the top, like that's kind of like the constructed floor for this card is you peek at your own top deck, and if it's something you want, you don't crack your fetch right away, and if it's something you don't want, you go ahead and crack your fetch right away and then draw something different on the next upkeep. Mm-hmm. And you'll see this card has like a pretty big pedigree in constructed too, right? Like where it's often played as a 4 of in kind of pseudo degenerate decks. This is probably the reason that like Lurrus is banned in a lot of constructed formats. Like obviously it's like Black Lotus and stuff when you talk about vintage and how that card's restricted or whatever, or maybe it's restricted, maybe it's banned as a companion, I don't actually know, but
I think they unbanned it recently.
They might have actually. There's something going on in Vintage that I'm not like fully aware of. But yeah, Mishra's Bauble will do some pretty degenerate stuff in things like Gruul. I know red-green prowess is a thing going on in Modern. I don't know how like top tier it is at the moment, but you'll see 4 Mishra's Baubles there. You'll see Mishra's Bauble accompany Lurrus wherever Lurrus is still legal, which is something we had going on in our cube quite a bit. And if you had Lurrus early on, Mishra's Bauble was like the card you were looking for to kind of like feel that synergy.
Yeah, you still kind of do it with Serra Paragon. It's one of White's better value cards. And one of the problems with Serra Paragon is if you play it on curve, you usually can't hit something. So usually you're having to wait till the next turn to try to hit a fetch land with it or a 1-drop. But Mishra's Bauble just lets you play out your Serra Paragon, get your free card draw worth of value, and then your opponent still has to kill it because if you untap with it, you're generating a bunch of value.
Mm-hmm. And this is going to lead into our conversation where, when we're talking about Mishra's Bauble for the, remainder of this episode, it's going to be in the context of this is giving your creatures like +1/+1 as a prowess trigger when you play it, to the point where like in the Izzet decks that we're going to be talking about, like if you have Mishra's Bauble in your opening hand, you often don't just run it out. Like if you're playing it just kind of as a one-off to kind of quote unquote decrease the number of cards in your deck, in just like any old deck, then yeah, you usually just fire off Bauble right away, look at a card, cantrip, get something different, and you've kind of thinned out your deck a little bit there to get to your better cards. But in the context of prowess, this trigger in prowess, this trigger in when you cast non-creature spell effects, you usually hold on to it until you have something else in play. So it's not just like run it out on turn 0 and get your card back. So yeah,
it allows you to do some sneaky Hazoret stuff too because of that, because you're likely to hold it. Yeah. Your opponent, I don't know if they're necessarily going to have the soul read on Hazoret, but like if you're doing the math, if you're trying to figure out, because Hazoret is a card you should be accounting for in your opponent's red aggressive deck, then you sometimes can figure out, okay, well, if they've got, 4 cards in their hand, right? The best they can do on 4 mana or 3 mana onto turn 4 is they can play a land, they can play Hazoret, they've got 2 cards in their hand, they can't attack. But if that last card is Bauble, suddenly you're sneaking the Hazoret into play and attacking with it, which in a normal game calculation wouldn't actually work. Now, again, are people going that deep on that thought? Probably not, but that's the sort of explosive plays that it allows you to make that kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of card I would love to play in like just a mono red deck. It doesn't necessarily contribute to the game plan, but the synergy with Hazard is there, and also like you do generally have some prowess creatures in red. Like you might be playing your Monastery Swift Spears, your Soul Scar Mages, and stuff like that.
So like trying to
just
show
getting
off
those prowess triggers. Yeah, exactly. The card is a workhorse for a lot of different decks that people don't necessarily see. It has such a low barrier to entry for basically any deck, and then it does have all of these micro synergies. Like I would implore people, like, if you come join either of our cubes, Peasant Cube or Jank Evergamen, mainline cube, this card is in both of those because our artifact count on Arena is kind of nothing, so that there's just room for it. I would implore people to like draft it. Maybe don't first pick it, but like if you see it on a wheel, draft it, and regardless of what you're doing, just throw it in your deck and see what it does. And I guarantee like at least 1 or 2 games you'll be like, oh, I got to do blah 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 because of Mishra's Bauble. I got to dig through time a turn earlier than I would have because I had Mishra's Bauble or whatever, things of that nature. So yeah, the card does a lot. It has been doing a lot since it was printed. Do you remember the time when Mishra's Bauble was $40 in paper before its first reprint?
I did not know it was ever that. I knew it was like, I remember it being like $5 or $10 at one point, but I didn't realize it got that high. This
thing was a money card for a long time. It was, I looked it up. It was printed in Cold Snap, and then the first time it was ever reprinted was Iconic Masters, which was like a 2010s, master set that nobody really remembers. And there was a long period of time where it was like, can we get a Mishra's Bauble reprint? Can we get a Mishra's Bauble reprint? And then of course it was on a bonus sheet for the Brothers War, so it's like dirt cheap now, like a couple bucks or whatever. But yeah, I remember this thing hit in $40 at one point, and I was like, Jesus, for like
this
a card that doesn't do anything.
Probably does need to be a $1 or less card. Like this is the kind of card that I'm cool with them taking the bottom out of on the secondary market for sure. Not that I have a problem with them doing it really anytime, but I think in particular a card like this probably should not be expensive.
I think I don't even know what the decks like back in like 2016, 2017 were playing Mishra's Bauble for. I want to say it was like Charbelcher decks or Oops All Spells decks that just like artificially wanted to lower their card count because they only had like a certain number of key cards. I don't actually remember why people were playing Mishra's Bauble 10 years ago, but it was a money card for quite a while. So yeah, little wrap on a 0 mana artifact there. We don't get a lot of those to play with, but try it out. It does some cool things, and it does lead us into our main topic today, which is Izzet Prowess in Cube. And I guess I should preface this by saying, like, we're mostly talking about cubes of the Arena historic card pool power level, like fair cubes, quote unquote. A lot of the conversation isn't going to apply to Vintage Cube necessarily, because I don't know if you know more about that than I do, but I don't think Vintage Cube is like really supporting Izzet spells or Izzet Prowess. It's just not like the type of archetype that really translates to Vintage Cube very much. It's just like ultimately too fair for what that environment is promoting.
Yeah, I've mentally checked out of Vintage Cube. I occasionally tune in to watch, Persian or Herald draft it, and it is just not anything like the Vintage Cube that I spent time with, and I don't really have a ton of interest in it, but I'm sure it does stuff there if you want it to, but I don't know anything really about the archetypes other than they keep putting Storm support in there, despite Storm generally being a terrible deck because people like playing it.
Yeah, we'll get to the Fetchland episode one day. I'm sure we'll get to the This Is Why Vintage Cube Sucks episode where we'll ruin our reputation, or I'll ruin my reputation at least. You guys can say whatever you want about it, but not a Vintage Cube believer, but that's a topic for another day. So what do we mean by Izzet Prowess, I guess, is like, yes, relying on creatures that literally have the word prowess on them, but also kind of melding the universal Izzet spells matters archetype that's in like every other set with like an aggressive or tempo based game plan. So using these spells matters creatures that are aggressively oriented, and then tying that together with whatever spells you have in your cube. So Izzet Prowess, not a thing that shows up in Vintage Cube, but tends to play out like a tempo aggro deck that has a lot of really, really cheap spells, whether those are instant sorceries or nowadays they've been kind of like focusing on the non-creature spells rather than specifically instant sorcery. So
huge W, by the way.
Yes, that was a big pickup, which they've kind of leaned into a lot. They've recognized like the prowessy type stuff works better when it counts things like artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers.
Yeah, it just gives them a lot more design space.
So I got a question for you. New set comes out tomorrow. We don't know anything about it, but we know it's going to be a 2-color set with the 10 traditional 2-color archetypes. What would be your guess for what the Izzet archetype is going to be in that set?
It's either going to be blue-red spells or blue-red artifacts, and if it's not, blue-red will be terrible.
or it'll be doing the Simic thing where it's the set mechanic archetype or whatever, right? Yeah, okay, so you said exactly what I wanted you to say, clearly, which is, blue-red is one of those archetypes where no matter what limited set you're playing, Izzet is kind of the one that you can almost always guess what it's going to be. If it's not exactly blue-red spells, it's something like adjacent to blue-red spells, right? It still kind of cares about non-creatures in some way, shape, or form. Just to kind of like highlight that point, I went through the last 10 limited formats from Tarkir Dragonstorm all the way back to March of the Machines, at least the standard line limited sets, and I just kind of like wrote out what were the blue-red archetypes for those sets, and the majority of them were in fact blue-red spells. Foundations, Bloom Burrow, Wilds of Eldraine, and to a lesser extent March of the Machine all had kind of like generic blue-red spells going on. And then a lot of the other ones ended up being either Artifacts Matter, like we saw in Lost Caverns of Ixalan or Karlov Manor. Some of the other ones ended up being very, very niche, like Duskmourn. If you remember, Duskmourn had blue-red rooms, which I think was the worst color pair in the set.
Here's the thing, though. That format, blue-red, wasn't as bad as people remember it being, but blue-red rooms was terrible. That deck was blue-red tempo deck was totally fine, and it was basically just a spells and tempo creature deck.
That's actually, it's funny. That's one of the few times where I'm like, I wish I had a limited podcast because I think I've cracked the code on blue-red, and it has nothing to do with what WotC wants you to do in blue-red.
The only room card that I thought was any good was the 3-mana 1/4 that if you played 2 rooms, like if you had enough rooms, having a 3-mana 4/4 was pretty good. It got like, if you had 2 rooms, I think, or 2 unlocked rooms, it got +3/+0 and became a 3-mana 4/4. That card was totally fine. But every other room card, oh no, I'm sorry. And there was also the gold card, but like, again, it was just because it was a cheap 2-drop that could also, cycle your rooms in for damage. Like there was some room synergies there, but you just really wanted to just be playing aggressive creatures and like removal / counter magic / card draw.
Yeah, but and then the gold card like counteracted the other card because it ate your rooms instead. So like you just kind of shit all over yourself.
You never wanted both of those cards in your same deck. Yeah, they were super at odds with each other.
Yeah, and you wrote out here, Tarkir doesn't really have blue-red as an archetype. Like you're supposed to be doing 3-color stuff. That's kind of where the build is. But like obviously Flurry, which was also the Thunder Junction archetype for blue-red, and it didn't pan out very well there. Flurry is kind of like secretly blue-red spells, right? Because the best way to double spell during turns is with cantrips and, cheap cards that replace themselves and stuff like that. So it kind of plays out like blue-red spells. I think that's kind of intentional by design. So Ether Drift, Cyclin was the archetype there, which you could make a case that like that was a blue-red spells deck of some sort, but they had Cyclone on enough different card types, and there was like vehicle matters stuff going on there that one actually felt like maybe a little bit different, kind of like Duskmourn. But for the most part, over the last like 3-4 years, and then if you go way back over the last like 10 years, it's spells matters for Izzet all the way. In fact, I think the first set to do the 10 2-color pair like signpost uncommons, like when that actually became a thing, I think it was original Theros, and the gold card for that set in Izzet was like Spellheart Chimera, which was like a flyer that got bigger when you cast a non-creature spell. And it was like that, and that wasn't even like a theme of the set. Like there was no blue-red spells theme. They just felt like they had to make a blue-red card that cared about spells because that's what blue-red does. So
it goes back at least as far as the Izzet Guild, right? That was kind of always their thing, is they were the mad scientist spell slingers, and it turns out it's just spell slingers all the way down.
It's just, I mean, it's what blue-red traditionally does. From a flavor perspective, it makes sense when you combine blue spellcasting and red spellcasting. Oh, Izzet is the color pair that cares about casting spells, and every now and then it gets to do something cool with artifacts, or if you think rooms are cool, it gets to do something thematic there. But for the most part, it's going to be a deck that cares about casting non-creature spells in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you even think about it into constructed, like when you think about blue-red, there's kind of, for me at least, there's two things that pop into my mind. It's blue-red does either some sort of weird combo control thing, or it's like a tempo wizards deck, right? It's all, there's been multiple times where blue-red, I think even right now, Izzet Prowess, Izzet Aggro, whatever, tempo, kind of a tempo prowessy deck is very good in standard, and that's just a historical thing. There was the historic wizards deck, and I think legacy delver decks would kind of fall into this case, right, of being like these blue-red tempo decks. So I think those are kind of the two things that blue-red does. Is it does wonky things, and it does this sort of heavy spells, lower creature count. We're gonna tempo you out kind of game plan.
And this is all to say, like, the history of Izzet isn't very deep. Like, it goes back quite a ways, but it's kind of doing the same thing throughout. Like, its tenure as a 2-color pair in limited archetypes and stuff like that, which means if you're going to, make a kind of quote-unquote fair cube, or a cube that's focused around the guilds or whatever, odds are your Izzet deck is going to care about spells in some way, shape, or form, whether you want it to or not. Like, even if you try to do something specific, you usually end up caring about spells, and because of that, it ends up being very easy to over support an Izzet spells archetype, which is something we see in our peasant cube quite a bit. In fact, over the 5 years we've been maintaining that cube, I think Izzet has always kind of like come out as quote unquote the problem child here or there, because of how easy it is to over support an archetype that cares about non-creature spells. Right, because most cubes play a bunch of non-creature spells, so you already kind of had the bread and butter there, and then it's easy to be like, oh, here's a bunch of cards that care about casting instants and sorcery, so your Izzet decks end up having tons and tons of payoffs, but also just like infinite enablers compared to other archetypes, because every instant, every sorcery in red and or blue is like a synergy piece for that deck. So just to kind of like synthesize that all up front Izzet is very easy to support in a cube environment, and even if you're kind of doing a bottom-up design, like we mentioned, going through density experiments and stuff like that, odds are your Izzet deck is going to have some sort of spell casting component to it, even if you're trying to do something more thematic. Like, you're just going to have the blue spells, you're going to have the red spells, those are going to combine together into some sort of tempo, control, aggro Izzet deck.
Yeah, I do think at the mainline power level that we're mostly going to be focusing on today, I do think you do need a little bit more in the way of that direct support. Though these cards are just good in general, though, right? The cards we're going to be talking about and really highlighting are going to be cards like Slick Shot Show Off, or Cori-Steel Cutter, or these like tempo prowessy cards. They are really powerful cards, but you do have to like lean into a little bit in the way of deck construction to really maximize them.
Yeah. And Izzet Prowess is kind of like where we've landed on right now for our mainline cube, which is why we want to talk about it. It's kind of the most effective way for us to build Izzet on the arena card pool right now for a cube of our power level. And that's not to say you can't build Izzet in other ways. One of Izzet's strengths is that it kind of leans into a bunch of different macro archetypes very, very well. Like, you can do Izzet Control, where you're focused way more on blue counter spells and red burn and stuff like that. Or you can do Izzet Aggro, which tends to be these kind of prowessy decks where you've got a couple threats that can actually beat down while you're, tempoing your opponent with your cheap counter spell and your cheap burn spells and stuff like that. And it's also very easy to have a mix of the two. I think at one point during our peasant cube, like, Izzet Control and Izzet like beat down, burn, aggro were both like totally viable decks, and you could have two people draft the same cube and walk away with functional Izzet decks doing different things.
I've never been a big believer of the Izzet Control deck, but yeah, I've always had some serious issues with that deck. But yeah, you can play it, or you could. I don't think you really can now. In
Peasant, it was really a Murmur and Mystic deck. It is kind of like.
Oh, you're talking about Peasant. Okay, yeah, I'm talking about in the. Yeah, my bad. I'm sorry, I missed that you were talking about Peasant.
No, you're right though. You're right. Like, is it at a higher power level? Like, the incentives for being an Izzet Control deck aren't great, because you still kind of need to stick a payoff like Young Pyromancer or something like that, and like that just doesn't live. Yeah,
I would also say the biggest issue is the removal spells stay the same, but the butts get way bigger.
Where are you referring to, like the butts of the creatures your opponents are going to be playing?
Yeah, like your deal 3 or your deal 2 or deal 3 at Peasant pretty much cleans up everything, right? Outside of, a few very specific creatures. But in the mainline cube, like your deal 2s are going to stop being effective on some 2-drops and definitely a lot of 3-drops.
Yeah, this whole conversation we had back in, around the time MH3 dropped is how many X4s there were compared to how many lightning strikes we were playing, and they just didn't line up very well. So like a red-based control deck really suffered if your opponent played Chrome Host Siege Shark or Preacher of the Schism or any of these or 6, any of these X4s that just live through lightning strikes. So good point there. Yeah. I also am not a believer in Izzet control. And part of the reason I wouldn't even want to play Izzet control is that like Azorius control and Dimir control already exist. Like you don't just need 3 blue-based control decks.
Yeah.
Unless you want the competition there with like the blue counter spells or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, in short, no Wraths, no Doomblades, bad time. Like, and especially in our environment, because we don't have access to, and we wouldn't, even if we did, we wouldn't support combo decks. And I think for Izzet control, historically, especially in Constructed, but even in Cube, I think there's always sort of a like, you're kind of doing something cheeky to win. You're doing something that really breaks parity. I mean, the combo I always think of is when Vintage Cube, you would play Izzet control, you almost always knew your opponent had Splinter Twin in their deck. They would be doing some sort of Kiki combo to finish the game. And the idea is you would just trade resources with your opponent and grind them down. And then once they were out of stuff, you would resolve your 2-card combo and win the game. But that's not really something we can support. The closest would be something like Gear Hulk with Sublime. But in order to survive long enough to do that, you could just put Doomblades in your deck.
Yeah. For us, the reason we've kind of gravitated towards, I think, prowess creatures in general, and I know Chris really loves the red prowess creatures, is because they overlap into other color pairs a lot better than something like Young Pyromancer, something that strictly cares about you cast an instance or sorceries, like kind of rattling off cantrips to kind of get your value. Those cards don't necessarily play at their best in like Rakdos or Boros or something like that, whereas the red prowess creatures, your Monastery Swiftspears, your Soulscar Mages, your Emberheart Challengers, these cards actually do play well enough in other red decks that aren't Izzet, while also being like kind of the linchpin cards of Izzet. So there's a little bit more cross synergy than there would be with cards that strictly care about you casting instants and sorceries and playing kind of to a longer game. So the red portion of the prowess decks lets us bleed over into other decks very well, whereas the blue stuff is kind of mostly secondary. I think we're going to go over some of the cards here that are, we're going to go over the prowess package of creatures and threats, but I think Kitsa is the only prowess creature in blue.
Yes, though I will say, we'll talk about this here in a minute, or whatever, but the proliferation of really good tempo-y blue creatures at 2 mana is a big reason why I think blue is like one of the best colors you can pair with red at the moment.
Yeah, so your Malcolms and your Plume Creed escorts and stuff like that, they really excel in these decks, just as additional threats, right? Like we're going to talk about the package of prowess creatures, but the first thing you'll notice is that it's like 5 or 6 cards.
Yeah, and a card like Flood Pit Drowner that we've been playing gets a lot better if you can flash it in, tap down your opponent's card, and then that basically, you kill them, and then that basically made it into 2 mana, 2/1 with Doomblade attached to it.
Yeah, they're all kind of there to facilitate getting your other prowess creatures in and having your big turns, while not having prowess themselves. Like the Flood Pit's Drowner doesn't directly like relate to the game plan, but it gets your prowess creatures through for those big turns. So very relevant. And then obviously like your Malcolms and your Plume Creed escorts are just additional sources of threats because you just don't have like a very high density of prowess threats. So I guess we should get into, what are the prowess threats? Well, at least what are the ones that we're playing? And maybe there's some other ones in the card pool that we could consider. But I think it really revolves around one. The thing you'll notice here, it's all 1-drops and 2-drops. It's all 1-drops and 2-drops. There's no 3-drop or above that has like fits the kind of quote unquote prowess creature bill. So we're talking your 1-drops. Your key 1-drops are Monastery Swiftspear and Soulscar Mage. Your 1/2s with prowess. Monastery Swiftspear tends to be better. Do you ever see the Soulscar Mage text come up? The Wither text on that card?
Surprisingly, actually, it does come up. I think it's actually at its best versus a matchup that red historically struggles with in the green creatures. I think it actually comes up there the most, because normally your burn spell just kills a creature, but the green creatures, they're really big, and so oftentimes you can use like a deal 3, right? and then it shrinks the creature, which then allows your Soulscar Mage to win the combat and survive. So it's not necessarily generating huge value per se, but it's allowing you to attack with your Soulscar Mage, eat your opponent's creature with your cheap removal spell, and keep your Soulscar Mage alive. Now, does it come up all the time? No, but I think that's the most relevant the text gets on average.
Yeah, it's the type of thing that a lot of times you'll just even forget that it happens until until it happens, and you're like, oh yeah, Soulscar Mage has this other ability. I remember back in the standard days when I was playing like the red aggro standard deck from Amonkhet or whatever, one of the things you could do, or one of the like key interactions, is if your opponent had Hazoret in the mirror, you could Glorybringer with Soulscar Mage in play to kill their Hazoret, because it would get 4/1/1 counters. It was like a key interaction to get over your opponent's Hazorets with your Glorybringers. Those are the golden years for sure. So Swiftspear, where are you at with Swiftspear these days? Is this still like an all-star cube card, or is this just like kind of niche now?
It's hard to say, because I sort of feel like this is in the category of cards like Clarion Spirit, where when I play them, I think the card tends to underperform. And when I watch people play them against me, I'm like, dear Lord, they played a 1-mana 3/4 with haste.
That's the hope. That's what you want Swiftspear to be.
I think the card's fine. I think you do need to be deep into the I'm playing the Prowess-y aggressive spells deck. You know, like I'm looking at a list you played recently, and this was to your point about, you know, all being 1 and 2 drops. Your deck has 2 cards in the deck that cost more than 2 mana. One of them is a modal card, and the other one is Embercleave. So really, every card in the deck just costs 2 mana.
Swiftspear has like such a name to it that it's like, of course it's in cube and stuff like that. But I actually think it like underperforms more than it overperforms personally. But
yeah, I think it's good in the deck that you're supposed to draft it in, and very, very, very bad everywhere else. Like, you don't put this card in your deck because you need a 1-drop in your Boros deck, right? You just like should cut that and play a better card at 2 or 3 mana most of the time. I think you play it because your deck is dedicated to doing the Swiftspear thing, and it's going to regularly be a 2/3, 3/4 into the mid game.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we should mention. I gotta look up the name of the card. Swiftspear's Teachings, which is it's an alchemy card. Like, bleep it out, plug your ears if you don't want to hear about alchemy cards or whatever. But it just came out in the Tarkir alchemy patch for Arena.
Very excited for it.
And it's a very cool card compared to where a lot of alchemy schlock ends up landing. But it's a red mana for a sorcery at uncommon that says you get a 1-time boon with when you cast a creature spell, it gains prowess and haste, draw a card. So basically it's a red cantrip that gives the next creature you cast prowess and haste permanently. It turns your next creature into a Monastery Swiftspear with whatever abilities or stat line it has. And it's a red cantrip, which you don't get too many of those. So this is a very cool card if you're playing on the Arena client. This is the type of thing I would not just dismiss under the like alchemy banner, because this is the type of thing that can actually just like bolster these strategies very, very well. And it's worth noting that prowess stacks too. So if you play Swiftspear's Teachings and then follow up with a creature that already has prowess, it will gain a second instance of prowess, which means it'll double trigger on any of your non-creature spells. So this is a really cool card that we haven't tested out yet. It's not actually on Cube Cobra at the time speaking, so we can't actually put it into a cube at the moment, but it is a very cool card that I wanted to mention here as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the cards that I got super excited about. It's the kind of card that they could have really just printed in paper. Due to tracking, they don't like to have things that persist between turns, which is what a boon does. But if they printed this card and it just lasted until end of turn, I would still be somewhat excited for it. I don't think it would be quite as good, because I think one of the things that this card does that's really exciting is some of the synergies you can do otherwise. So just to put into perspective what I'm talking about, you can do something like on your turn 2, turn 1 you play Soulscar Mage, turn 2 you play your Swiftspear, you play Swiftspear's Teachings, right? And then you attack. And then on turn 3 you play like an maybe Breaches would be a better example, but you play like, you know, that, or it's something exciting like an Adeline, and give it haste, you know, these creatures with good combat triggers. And so you can kind of carry the buff and use the haste on the next turn, and it creates a huge amount of explosiveness from cards that are not supposed to attack the turn that they come down, which has me pretty excited for it. You know, there's some weird Gruul stuff you can do with like Bloated Contaminator could get funny. So I think there's a lot of stuff you can do with this card that's very cool. We'll have to see if it ends up actually, you know, being good. And I I'm not super worried about this particular one being too good. It feels like the kind of card that is close enough to a real card that it's probably okay. However, that is how they get you historically with the alchemy cards. They read like they're fine, and then you play them and you're like, this is broken.
Oh, yeah, you want to talk about a busted uncommon alchemy card. Actually, we probably don't need to get into it here. The Wayfarer's Guidestone or whatever it's called, the white mobilized thing. But yeah, so one note here about, like, could this exist in paper is they could totally just do prowess and haste counter on your next creature spell. Obviously, that's a lot of tracking, right? Your next creature spell, especially if it carries on over to the next turn. But they have, I mean, for Christ's sakes, they had exalted counters in Modern Horizons 3, right? Like, if we can do exalted counters, then surely we can do prowess counters. And, like, I know haste counter is something they don't want to do very often because that doesn't actually mean anything beyond, like, the first turn that a creature comes down. So, like, why would you track a haste counter? But they've totally made, I think, Indominus Rex uses a haste counter. So, like, it's a thing that exists in paper. But
yeah, and if they didn't want to do that, you could just say it gains a prowess counter and has haste until end of turn.
Yeah, you could totally do that. But the boon thing, I guess, is hard to track in paper if it carries on. But to your point, like, even if it only lasted until the end of turn, it's still probably
we're keeping secret track of whether you selected merfolk, human, or goblin. I think we can handle boons.
Yeah, go refer to our poorly received alchemy episode from a few episodes back if you want to hear more about mine and Teld's opinion about alchemy. But all right, so the 1 mana spells: Monastery, Swift Spear, Soulscar Mage, and then 2 mana. You have Emberheart Challenger. That's the 2 mana 2/2 haste mouse that has Valiant that impulse draws whenever you target it for the first time each turn. And then Slickshot Show Off as the 1/2 flying haste with plot for 1 and a red. And that's like super prowess creature. It doesn't actually have the word prowess on it, but it gets +2/+0 when you cast a non-creature spell. And that one kind of took off in standard as like kind of one of the premier prowess cards.
This card, it reads as a 1/2, but it I don't think I've ever seen it not have 5 power.
Oh, I almost one-shot somebody with this, like this into Burn Spell into Embercleave or something. I was like 2 points off from just straight up one-shotting them out of the game.
Yeah, if you haven't really lived until you've cast a Monstrous Rage on this card, which is obviously a standard thing at this point, but like it just does so much damage.
Yeah, Plot's also just really nice on this sort of card. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but like one of the weaknesses of this deck is that you get your targets just picked off by removal spells, and then you're not getting prowess triggers off of your spells, so you're not really doing anything. The fact that this has plot lets you kind of like load up, like overload your opponent's turn. They might have interaction for one thing, but you might be able to go like prowess creature into Slickshot Show Off of plot into like interaction and stuff like that, and then you just really push them over the top. And if they don't have an answer for Slickshot Show Off, oftentimes you can just hit them for 5 a turn. This is where your Mishra's Baubles really come into play, right? It's just an extra free 2 points of power on your Slickshot Show Off.
Yeah, it scales super hard with an Embercleave, obviously. That's just Embercleave being good. The other thing, too, is because you can plot it, it allows you to do stuff like using Plumecrete Escort or Spell Pierce or things like that to make sure you can protect your cards as well, which is really, really nice.
Mm-hmm. Kitza, Otterball Elite, I mentioned already. This might be my favorite card in the Jank Diver Gaming Cube. Like, even if you're not doing the... I really enjoyed
this card.
Yeah, it's so cool, first off, but even if you're not doing, like, Izzet Prowess, you can just put it in another blue deck as like a looter that deals passive damage. It's a very well-rounded card, but it's really strong in these prowess decks.
Yeah, I do think it's a card that maybe I'm on the wrong side of this, but it feels like to me this is a card that I tend to prefer in slightly slower decks. So it's not a card that I'm in love with if I'm just trying to kill my opponent dead, because the 1/3 stat line, even with prowess, means that you're not getting as much damage through as you might want. But I do value it quite heavily as a looter that's also a pretty good blocker, because your opponent, oftentimes, like, if you have 1 mana up, your opponent can't really attack into your Kitza because it'll just turn into a 2/4 and eat their dude. Mm-hmm. But though I will say, I did watch, I think it was you cast a Monstrous Rage copy a Monstrous Rage off a Kitza, and that was just, I realized I have not lived. I have not felt quite that alive in a minute. And granted, Monstrous Rage is a card I love. It's a card that I'm really excited about, and people are finally on that it's super good, and making a second copy of it's really, really gross.
I had a turn 4 kill with that deck. That deck went 1 and 2 for the night because it just got picked off by removal, which is kind of the whole point I wanted to do this episode for, is to kind of like talk about the newcomers and like the strengths and weaknesses of Izzet Prowess. But that deck killed on turn 4 with something like Swift Spear into Kitza into something on 3, and then Monstrous Rage plus another. It was a Mishra's Bauble turn where I got Kitza up to 3 power off of casting the Monstrous Rage, and then I was able to copy the Monstrous Rage and just killed on turn 4 with like a flurry of spells and prowess creatures, which is the type of thing these decks can do. An unopposed Izzet Prowess deck will just kill you on like turn 4, but the thing is you usually are facing down some sort of blockers or interaction. Like if you just goldfished Izzet Prowess against somebody who literally does nothing, you'll kill them on turn 4.
It's a great answer to the multicolored nonsense decks because they tend to play like early game lands.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, well, you just shocked yourself, so thank you for making my job easier.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Kitza's great, and the looting is not insignificant. Like even if you're not doing the prowess beatdown, you know, combo off kill you on turn 4 thing, just being able to loot every turn for free is nice as well. So Kitza's an excellent card, just sweet design. That does bring us to Sprite Dragon, which is a card that has been in and out of the cube over various points. It's actually an all-star card in the Peasant Cube as well. And this is basically just a glorified prowess creature. And the first instance I can remember of them really pushing non-creature instead of instant and sorcery. I think they started doing that like kind of regularly in Ikoria, where they recognized like, oh, okay, well, we want this to interact with other sorts of spells too. So Sprite Dragon, blue-red for a 1/1 haste flyer, Fairy Dragon, and gets +1/+1 counter whenever you cast a non-creature spell. So kind of super prowess, unkeyworded super prowess. And the card puts in work. It holds up.
Yeah, uncommon, man. It's like this card was super pushed. I actually remember when this card came out, I played this like janky budget standard deck up into platinum or diamond with just playing like Lofty Denial and Sprite Dragon and Spectral Sailor, and it was like it wasn't a very good deck, but there was so many people playing control decks, and you would resolve this on turn 2 or 3 with like a Spell Pierce backup and just kill people. Yeah. So I have a lot of good memories with this card in particular, but yeah, if this card is unopposed, like it does not stay small for long, and it keeps the buffs over turn. So usually, you play it, and then this is where, again, your Bauble can come in because you can immediately put a +1 counter on it, and it's already a massive threat. But if you untap with this card, it starts doing some really scary things, particularly given that you can protect it with cards like, again, Spell Pierce, Slip Out the Back, Plume Create Escort, Counter Magic. Like, there's a lot of things. This is the kind of card that you can just Delver people, where if you've played the older Delver deck, you just ride like a single evasive scaling threat into victory. And this is the kind of card that you can actually do that with. It's one of the rare kind of cards in this cube that is really just you can get on its back and let it carry you to the finish line if you're able to protect it.
Yeah, and if you're on the other side of the field, you usually have that 1 turn window to come down. Like, oftentimes, if you have nothing else to do, you'll play your Sprite Dragon on 2, you'll hit for 1, and you'll just kind of, like, fingers crossed your opponent doesn't kill it for the turn. And, like, from the opposite side of the table, if you're in a position to play to your board or kill Sprite Dragon, you should probably bolt the Fairy Dragon, as they say, You should probably get rid of Sprite Dragon. Otherwise, they're going to untap with a Spell Pierce or something. They're going to grow it to a 3/3, and then when you try to kill it, they're going to counter your spell and also make their Sprite Dragon bigger. So kill it when you have the chance. Otherwise, like, you will get buried underneath the Sprite Dragon.
Yeah, one downside of Sprite Dragon is if you're an older, more entrenched player, you might have some of the old Ikoria alternative arts, and then you are unfortunately stuck having to put Dorat into your deck and then go in and change it back to the base Sprite Dragon art for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Godzilla, but Dorat is just like the most off-putting card I can think of. So there were 2 other cards I wanted to mention here as like Prowess-Adjacent cards that aren't really, Prowess cards necessarily. Dragon's Rage Channeler, I think you've already mentioned. That's the red 1/1 with Delirium. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you surveil 1. And then when you have Delirium in your graveyard, it becomes a 3/3 flyer that has to attack every turn. This is just a very, very well-known card. One of Red's best 1-drop, one of the best 1-drops ever printed, in terms of efficiency and what it does throughout the course of a game. But obviously, like, if you're playing Mishra's Baubles and spells and stuff like that, it's going to be easier to get Delirium, plus those surveils help add up. This is another one of those kind of Sprite Dragon, Delver type threats where you just want to get something super aggressive going early on, and it helps you, draw into better cards over time. And then I think we can both agree, love or hate Ledger Shredder, wherever the hosts on the the call right now land on that. Izzet is the home for Ledger Shredder. Yeah. It is at its best in decks that are able to double spell, obviously, pretty much every turn with just low curves and bunch of cantrips and stuff like that.
Yeah, Ledger Shredder is actually pretty good here. This is my biggest criticism of Ledger Shredder is putting it in decks that you'll never double spell, and this deck looks to double spell frequently, so Ledger Shredder is good.
Yeah. Did you mention Mischievous Mystic here?
Yeah, just in general, I think this card's just very, very powerful. But I think unlike Young Pyromancer type cards, this card's actually quite good in these decks because one, you're looking to play cards like you've already mentioned, cards like Kitza potentially, cards like Malcolm potentially. You have to work a little bit, but there's a lot of card draw. There's a lot of ways to trigger it, and it represents a evasive clock on its own. And if you get one or two triggers off this, it creates a lot of extra pressure. And you still get the upside of the Young Pyromancer thing of being able to use them as chump blockers if you need to. But the flying here is really big, and it's just a nice 2-drop if you're able to trigger it a few times. It's a little harder to do in Izzet if you're not running a bunch of cantrips, but if you have those, it can be quite nice.
Yeah, that sort of evasive package plus long game board advantage, if things are going right for you is nice. And that's a type of design that we've got our eye on for the future. Like, are they going to do more Mischievous Mystic thing? They did that vehicle. The name is escaping me right now.
Yeah, Thopter Fabricator. Now that one specifically, I would not play I would not be excited to play in my Izzet Prowess deck.
But you wouldn't be because it's kind of expensive and clunky. But there is something to say about beater that also triggers prowess, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, it is a 4/4 flyer for 3 mana, but yeah, a little expensive, doesn't contribute immediately to the board in most cases, and kind of facilitates a bit of a longer gameplay. And I think this one's more control coded, whereas the Mischievous Mystic, I think, is a little more aggro coded.
Mm-hmm. Plus, if you're going to crew it, you presumably are tapping like some of your prowess creatures, which is not right. You want to be attacking with those, probably would be.
Yeah, so I could see a world where you play this, but compared to the other options you have at 3 mana, stuff like Cryptic Coat or Breaches or Gastal Thrill Roller, if you're trying to like or Detective's Phoenix or whatever, I think there's just better options for these sort of aggro prowess style decks at 3 mana.
Agree. The platonic ideal of a prowess deck doesn't have 3 drops in it at all. It's just right. All 1 drops and 2 drops in interaction. So I wanted to, those are kind of like the prowess creatures. It's Swift Spear, Soulscar Mage, Emberheart Challenger, Slickshot Show Off, Kitza, Sprite Dragon. It's 6 cards. Those are the 6 kind of like 1 to 2 drop Izzet Prowess cards, and then you have things like the Channeler and Ledger Shredder kind of like padding out the rest of the package, so to speak. Also remembering that like your Boros or Rakdos decks might occasionally like snipe the Swift Spear or the Emberheart Challenger, so like you don't always get all of them in the same deck, which is fine. Like Kitza will sometimes get taken by like your Simic decks or whatever, just because they want a 2-drop that does looting. They don't necessarily care about prowess, so like you don't always get every single card. Obviously the ideal decks will have like basically all of these kind of together, so they all piggyback off of each other. But then it's like, okay, what are the kind of other key cards that pull prowess together? Some of which are like concessions to the fact that you have this prowess deck, Mishra's Bauble being an example. Not necessarily like we don't need to go through every single instant and sorcery that you could play, right? Because those are just kind of bread and butter effects. But what are the things that we play that excel in these prowess decks, or are really only here because they work in the context of these prowess decks?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think one that sticks out is like you just want Monstrous Rage in every one of these decks. I mean, this is just like the mono red. One of our guys who shows up sometimes and plays red aggro a ways back told me he felt like it was the single best card in the entire cube for playing red aggro, and it took me a little while to come to that conclusion, but I am now thoroughly on that train. I think Monstrous Rage might be the best red card in the cube.
I think it's better than Lightning Bolt if you're a creature deck.
Yeah. Like, there's definitely decks. The thing with Monstrous Rage that I think make Lightning Bolt still a little bit better is that Lightning Bolt goes in literally any deck that can produce red mana consistently. Whereas Monstrous Rage, you do have to have that I'm trying to attack you dead. I'm trying to play a creature deck. But once you've met that bar, Monstrous Rage is a really, really broken card because for some reason, despite knowing it exists, people don't play around it, partly because, especially on these prowess creatures, it's very difficult to actually play around. It represents usually like +4, +2.
Yeah. Our good players play around it. Our best players know to play around it.
Yeah, but you still find people getting completely blown out by this card, and it's kind of got that Tyvar Stained energy sometimes, where it's like you're tapped out and you make your blocks. You're like, all right, well, do they have Monstrous Rage? And the answer is they always have Monstrous Rage. Imagine if Embercleave cost 1 mana.
I was going to say, it's part of the reason I've come down on Embercleave so much is that there's a 1 mana version of Ember. Like, obviously it doesn't have the output, but it also doesn't have all the, like, fiddly mana cost requirements or anything. It's just always a 1 mana spell. And just to reiterate, like, pack 1, pick 1, I would take Lightning Bolt over Monstrous Rage. But if I was in some sort of red aggressive or, you know, Izzet Prowess deck, I would take Monstrous Rage over Lightning Bolt. Assuming I have, like, other forms of red burn already.
Yeah. Another one we talked about up at the top of the episode was Mishra's Bauble. I think it's really maximized in these Izzet Prowess decks. I think it's good everywhere, but I think in these decks it's very, very strong.
Mm-hmm. This is the best home for Mishra's Bauble.
Yeah, and then there's I know people haven't really enjoyed this card or haven't really been high on this card, but I do think a card like Birthday Escape is a card we're testing that has some potential legs. And Ranger's Firebrand is one that I'm much higher on. I think people should be playing this card in their aggressive decks. So Ranger's Firebrand and Birthday Escape both have the Tempted by the Ring text, which the first level of it, if you just cast it 1 time, gives your creature the ability to be unblockable by creatures that have greater power. And most of these prowessy creatures start at 1 power. And so a lot of times you can do things with these cards where you get your buff on the turn, you attack with them. And then on future turns, you can attack in unblocked and then cast a couple of instants and buff your creatures, but they haven't been able to block and now they take a bunch of damage. So I think Ranger's Firebrand is definitely the better of the two because it's just a sorcery speed shock that does this. And I think that's pretty good for an aggressive deck. But I think there's some legs on Birthday Escape and I would like to see people try this card a little more.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you if you think it's more meme than dream. Part of the reason I think people don't play it is because the card is called Birthday Escape. Like, it's not, there's nothing appealing about the card, like, on a fundamental level.
I think you have to be deep in the Prowess tank to want this, but I think I would like to try it sometime before we inevitably end up cutting it, just to see if we can, just to see what it does.
Yeah, and this goes back to, like, just to compare these two cards side by side. Most of the Prowess threats are centered in red, not blue, so, like, Ranger's Firebrand is just going to line up better with your Monastery Swift Spears and stuff like that, you know, over Birthday Escape.
There's also the issue that traditional blue cantrips have a little bit of, like, air to them, where you're playing them because they allow you to get these prowess effects and make your deck more consistent, but you're paying mana, functionally speaking, with something like this, for example, to get no card selection, you're literally just cycling for 1 mana, and 1 is not 0, which is why Mishra's Bauble is so good. It doesn't have to do anything extra to be good because you paid nothing to get in on the buy-in. But when you have to start paying mana on these aggressively slanted decks, there is an opportunity cost there, and like Ranger's Firebrand, again, jumps that hurdle a little better because for that 1 mana, you're getting the standard rate just at a slower speed.
Yeah, my guess is Birthday Escape doesn't stick around for much longer, mostly because people are kind of like, people aren't really like enticed by it, even in the type of decks we're talking about. It's just not a super sleek or sexy card or anything like that, whereas Ranger's Firebrand at least has like the baseline of being a playable shock, so that one gets more of a pass. Kamano faces Kakazan. This is where we need Chris on the episode because he's a huge champion of this card, and I'm right there with him, probably as like an all-timer, you know, best in class red 1-drop aggressive card.
I think it is the best, actually. I think this is in terms of like what we have access to outside of like Ragavan, specific cards like Heartfire Hero or Ragavan or whatever. I think in terms of just regular power level, no synergy, this card is just it's so good. It's like 1 mana 2/2 haste that it's really like 3/3 worth of stats, and you get to ping on top of it.
And Graveyard Hoser, stupid. I hate that. Actually, I hate that. So it comes up all the time. Every time someone has Kamano faces Kakazan, and I think I've stabilized, somehow that graveyard text just like shuts down my ability to stabilize, and you just don't think it's that relevant, and then it just always is. But yeah, Kamano faces Kakazan is like a delayed 2/2 haste that pings your opponent, makes a creature bigger with +1 count. It just does so much for a 1-drop, and it is in that very, very sweet spot for Izzet specifically, where, yes, it's not a prowess creature, it's not going to benefit from all of your cantrips and stuff, but it is a non-creature spell itself, so it's kind of contributing to your other creatures that way. And the +1/+1 counter on Chapter 2 is not insignificant either. You could get your Soulscar Mage to come down as a 2/3 instead of a 1/2 already. It's like it has a permanent prowess trigger, you know?
Yeah, and that's really big with these prowess creatures too, because a lot of times you're pretty face up about the fact that you can get 1 trigger. But when you've got the counter on it, suddenly that 1 counter means a lot more, and especially if you're able to double spell, it just makes it gigantic. Like, these creatures really scale up rather quickly, and because they continue scaling, stats, like, one of the things in Magic is that stats go on top of stats is better, right? I don't know if I phrased that properly, but it's like it's kind of like how one turn of Luminar Gasprit in play is like manageable. But if you have a Luminar Gasprit in play for 2 or 3 turns, the stats you're able to put on a single creature or across multiple creatures opens up so many lines of attack that it's huge. And I think that Kamano facilitating these prowess creatures just means that you have to cast less spells to get good attacks out of them.
It also curves very, very well in the Kitsa, because just getting extra counters on Kitsa is one step closer to, doing the double spell thing with Kitsa, which...
now Kitsa, you can actually just do one spell with a counter on it. You can just do one spell, prowess, and copy it. Now you're talking about a card that is actually just 2 mana copy a spell, right? Because you get it when you cast the spell that gives it the first prowess trigger, which is really crazy.
Yeah, I like Monstrous Rage. If you land Monstrous Rage on Kitsa, basically you just get to copy every other spell for the rest of the game, and it does some pretty... But if you land Monstrous Rage on Kitsa, your opponent just takes like 30 damage, so they're probably just dead. You don't actually get to do anything cute there.
But it does really increase your range when you put a counter on Kitsa on turn 2, and now you can pay 3 mana to make your shocks kill 2 creatures. You can double up your shocks so that, your shock kills a 4-drop. There's just so much that flexibility it provides on that card specifically. Slickshot's another one where your opponent sometimes will have like a 2-1 that can block it, because there's a lot of 2-1 flyers. And so suddenly 2-3 Slickshot attacks past them, and then they just die because it gets through.
Yeah, literally the abyss.
Yeah. So just the +1 counter on these red prowessy creatures, very, very big game.
A lot bigger than you would imagine, but big deal. I mean, think about how much a single prowess trigger matters, and then imagine if the prowess triggers were permanent. Maybe that's the evolution of prowess. In future Magic design is just, instead of prowess, there's some new keyword that's just Sprite Dragon, where it's just permanent +1/+1 counters or something like that. Feels we're gonna get something like that at some point. But
they teased it with electrostatic infantry, right?
The Sprite Dragon text is on electrostatic infantry. It might be only instant or sorcery instead of non-creature.
It's only instant and sorcery, so we haven't gotten to full non-creature, but I expect that eventually we'll get something like that.
Yeah, that bad boy has trample too.
Yeah, so Kamano's amazing, because keep in mind, you got all of this value for 1 mana. 1 mana.
Yeah.
You really can't do much better for 1 mana than Kamano.
Yeah, and the turns where it comes off as a hasty creature are pretty huge. Your opponent is usually stumbling to try and keep up with your prowess starts, and then you get these turns where you're okay, here's Monastery Swiftspear, and also Kamano came off, and also here's a removal spell, and there's 8 extra damage coming at you that you could have accounted for, but what are you gonna do about it unless you literally killed all your opponent's creatures? It can do some. It can lead to some pretty threatening turns to see that Kamano, especially. I mean, just the turn 1 Kamano into turn 2 creature to get the +1 counter into anything on turn 3 is such a fantastic start for basically any deck that can play Kamano. So yeah, put that card in your cubes, people. That card is amazing as a red aggressive creature. I wanted to give a special shout out specifically to Spell Pierce and Slip Out the Back, which if I'm in a very, very low curve prowess deck like the ones we've been talking about, I believe these are just way more important than any other counter spells. Even literal counter spell, all of the 2 mana quench variants and stuff like that. I think you would rather have Spell Pierce and Slip Out the Back, and the reason for that is you are usually playing with a really tight mana base, and every mana you have access to matters a lot, and your curve is usually very, very low, and you need to make sure your creatures don't just get picked off by removal spells. And it's hard to get to the point where you're playing your 2 mana Emberheart Challenger while still somehow having the mana left over to hold up counterspell.
Yeah, and specifically counterspell specifically in these Izzet decks is sometimes a bit of a trap, because it costs blue, yeah. Which I actually think pretty much all the other counter spells are preferable here, because you for something like Phantom Interference, for example, ends up just being counterspell for this deck, because the more aggressive you are, the better these quench variants get. And that's part of why Spell Pierce is so good here, is you force the issue. When you play Spell Pierce in a control deck, you usually can find a spot where it's pretty good, but you kind of just have to take what you can get with it. Whereas with these Izzet decks, you really force the issue, and your opponent doesn't have the luxury most of the time of playing around Spell Pierce.
And worst case scenario is you're attacking them with 2 prowess creatures. They have to fire off the removal spell, and then you Spell Pierce them and you get prowess triggers, right?
Yeah, imagine your Spell Pierce has a giant growth attached to it or something.
Yeah, it feels so good. It is a key card just for how it slips into the curve. And, just being able to counter that Wrath on turn 4 is usually game over. But even just picking off, like, just 1-for-1, trading your Spell Pierce for their Fatal Push or their Cut Down or whatever is usually enough to, like, leverage an early gameplay or game. Because you will just fold to somebody. Like, if you go Prowess Creature, they remove it. You go Prowess Creature, they remove it. You are in a really tough spot to be able to win a game like that.
Yes. I will say I find Slip Out the Back a little more awkward, and I actually find it a little bit better in mid-rangey control-y decks, simply because losing out on the damage, even if you protect your creature, is oftentimes backbreaking for you. I mean, you would rather have your creature be alive, right? So it's still a good card. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have quite the same impact as it does when you protect, a Sphalin, for example, in your control deck. Or, something like that. I think a lot of times in those cases, you just kind of win the game on the spot, whereas Slip Out the Back just lets you keep playing the game, which is still good, but just a little bit weaker compared to Spell Pierce. And one other thing is you don't want too many of these reactive cards in your deck in general. Like, when you're building these Izzet Prowess decks, you probably want at most 2 or 3 of these protective effects, and that's probably stretching it. Like, I think 1 to 2 is probably more reasonable, because you're already accounting for removal, prowess creatures, and the cantrips, which are a little airy to begin with. So you don't have a ton of room for cards that can't contribute to your multi-spell turns.
Yeah. And I guess maybe we should read Slip Out the Back. That's not like a commonly played card. It's a blue mana for an instant that says target creature phases out, or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and then it phases out. And I actually find that when I'm playing decks like this, I end up using my Slip Out the Back on the opponent's creature more often than my own. Like, obviously you'll use it to protect your Slick Shot Show Off or something like that, and just make sure one of your threats stick around. But this does just remove a blocker for a turn, pumps your prowess creatures. It can often be the type of card that closes out the game as kind of like, getting your opponent's big creature. The same way you would use something like Fading Hope, like an unsummoned variant, which, again, those are at their best in these tempo blue-based, like spell-based decks. Slip Out the Back is kind of serving that purpose, but you can also use it as protection for your own creature. The +1/+1 counter is nice and all that, but obviously, like Teld said, you don't really want to give up the damage for the turn, but you'll do it if your opponent's trying to remove like your one really important solitary threat or something like that. But the important part here is that it is a 1 mana spell that slips into the curve alongside things like Kitza and Emberheart Challenger and stuff like that, rather than being a counter spell that's going to require you to get to like turn 4 to double spell and hold up your interaction. You really need those first like 3 turns of the games to go in your favor for these prowess decks to have a shot at actually winning.
So it slips into the curve. Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to back out of that joke.
Slips into the back. Yeah. There's other jokes we could go for there, but we're not going to. The newcomers. This is kind of the exciting part, the part that I really wanted to talk about, and kind of the whole reason I wanted to talk about Izzet for the most part is the new card Cori-Steel Cutter, which from my understanding is like the new Slick Shot Show Off for standard in the same decks that are playing Slick Shot Show Off. Apparently this card is just
the new hotness. So a Cori-Steel Cutter is 1 in a red for a artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, has trample and haste. You equip for 1 in a red. And then it has Flurry. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess, and then you may attach this equipment to it. So in our set review of this card, my recollection is that we were optimistic about this card, but were uncertain if it was going to have the output necessary to be a truly great card. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, I remember being like, I think I see something in this card. I feel like there's like some longevity to it. There's some play to it, but like it could be the type of card that falls flat. So.
And it did not. It did not fall flat.
No, if it's very rounded. It's very round, no corners.
Yeah, this card is. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but this card has looked fantastic in the little bit I've seen it, and it does look like the output on it for these decks is very, very good.
Yeah. Now, a little caveat here is that it is the type of card like Ledger Shredder, obviously, like an Arclight Phoenix or something, that is going to excel in constructed like way more than it does in Cube, because you can just build a deck to have like all 1 and 2 mana spells every single time.
Also, the scaling of multiples.
Yeah, you can have multiple steel cutters. You can do things like you can set your deck up to be able to trigger Flurry on your opponent's turns and stuff like that. Plus, like your prowess tokens, your prowess monks or whatever are just better and constructed when you're doing this sort of stuff too. So like Cori-Steel Cutter is an excellent card in standard and, constructed formats in general, whereas it's merely just a good card in cube. Like I don't know that I would first pick Cori-Steel Cutter unless I was trying to be Izzet Prowess, but here's the reason I like this card is I have mentioned multiple times in this episode alone that these prowess decks get just absolutely destroyed by people who are on piles of interaction. Like, yes, sometimes you have your spell pierce, you can get them, but for the person who drafted like cut down fatal push, like 5 doom blades or whatever, and just has like straight up blue black control, you're going to have trouble beating them if they're able to just 1-for-1 with your prowess creatures. Because like we said, there are 6-7 prowess creatures in the deck. Usually you're not playing 10 creatures in your prowess deck. You have some very, very key threats that need to survive. And if your opponent like answers them, then you end up in the situation where you're kind of floundering. You're firing off your cantrips to find your next prowess creature. But by the time you find your next prowess creature, you don't have any of those cantrips left. So it's just kind of like a dorky 1-2 or whatever. Where I really like Steel Cutter is that it gives you something sticky into the late game. If your opponent answers like the first flurry token you make on Steel Cutter, you can just make another one. You're doing that same thing. You're floundering, you're casting your cantrips trying to find your next threat. But while you're doing that, you create another prowess token that can start attacking, right? So it gives you kind of a little bit of game against control decks and against interactive decks that like the other cards don't have. Like if your opponent answers your Emberheart Challenger right away, you're just down a creature. Whereas if your opponent answers your Cori-Steel Cutter, and we're going to assume that like Cori-Steel Cutter will at least make the first prowess token most of the time, not on turn 2 unless you have Mishra's Bauble, but on like turn 3, you'll start making your 1/1s or whatever, your 2/2 prowess creatures. If your opponent answers those, you have something sitting in play that can give you extra value by casting your spells without necessarily having to hit additional like prowess threats off the top of your library. So I really like the stickiness of this. I like the way that it gives you game against what is presumably the best way to beat the prowess decks, and it's just kind of a powerful card too. I don't, the way it's played out, I don't really see people going for it in like a Gruul deck. Like that was one of the things we talked about in the set review is like, it is just a piece of equipment too, right? Like, yeah, it has this like spellsy kind of taste to it with flurry. It makes prowess creatures, but as a piece of equipment, maybe you run it in like a red creature deck or something like that. That's not necessarily spell based. I don't really see a world where people are going to go for that, but in specifically like the spell-based decks that care about prowess, it is just an excellent card. And just like Kamano Faces Kakazan, it is a non-creature spell itself, so it contributes to the game plan when you cast it, the turn you cast it as well. Going like Monastery Swiftspear into Cori-Steel Cutter is a good enough start, I think, because if you can follow that up on turn 3 by triggering Flurry, you're just going to be attacking for so much damage. So I really like this card. I've liked what it represents. or
you play Cori-Steel Cutter, and then you play a certain 0 mana card. I mean, there's so many of them, and then you trigger your Flurry on turn 2.
Are you saying Bauble is good?
I might be saying that. Yeah, I also think this card's probably pretty good in Boros. I think you would probably end up playing it there, just for the go wide. Like I usually Courier Spirit's okay in that deck. So I have to imagine this card's probably pretty good there too. Little awkward with like Stoneforge because you tutor it up and then like it doesn't really work with any part of it. But also if your deck's good enough at triggering Cori-Steel Cutter, maybe just being able to tutor it up, play it on turn 3 with a 1-drop is just like good enough.
Yeah, maybe. I could see. I mean, Inti comes to mind as a card that I would absolutely like to put a Cori-Steel Cutter on. So, whatever red aggressive creatures you have in your non-prowessy decks, I could see a world for it.
Very good with Regal Bunnicorn too, because if you give it Trample Haste, it makes a bunch of game artifacts for it.
Yeah. So there's a home for this. I mean, obviously it's like a Ledger Shredder type card where it's like play me in blue red, but there's a home for this in non-blue red decks, if that makes sense. And I just like the way it plays against. I like that it is an answer to the things that answer this deck the best, is kind of the way I would put it. And that led me to kind of digging through a little bit and being like, okay, well, I played this blue-red prowess deck. It was explosive, but it also just got kind of picked off by removal. What other kind of sticky cards exist in the card pool in this same vein? And that brought me to Storm Chaser's Talent, which was a card I think we talked about in our Bloomburrow review last year. This is the 1 mana class enchantment that makes a 1/1 Prowess Otter. And then to level it up to level 2, you can pay 4 mana and get an instant or sorcery back from your graveyard to your hand. And then it does have a 6 mana mode of when you level it up for 6 mana, every time you cast a non-creature spell, you make a 1/1 Prowess. So it becomes a Monastery Mentor for like exorbitant amounts of mana. I don't think that'll happen that often, but it is somewhere to sink your mana. But I like the idea of, here's 1 mana 1/1 Prowess. That's like worse than Soulscar Mage. That's worse than Monastery Swiftspear. But as far as damage output against an unblocked board, it's the same amount. So it starts there. It is a non-creature spell, just like the Steel Cutter. So it triggers all of your other prowess stuff. And then in the face of people who are just like picking off all your threats, it does give you that extra little push of like, here's a mana sink that lets you get a spell back. Right, even if that spell is just a cantrip or something, that might be all you need to get that extra prowess turn or whatever. And I don't know if you disagree about the 6 mana mode. I can't imagine that's going to decide games that often. But if you spent your first 4 turns presenting threats and your opponent spent their first 4 turns answering threats, like maybe you get to the point where like the board is clear enough that you can just sink mana into this saga, or not saga, this class enchantment, and like maybe the last level or chapter actually becomes like a win condition of some sort. I think it's mostly chapter 1 puts a prowess threat on board, chapter 2 lets you get a spell back to give you some extra value beyond just playing a prowess creature.
Yeah, I suspect the line for that is going to be something along the lines of, all right, I've activated my 6 mana mode to help grind out against my opponent's control deck, and then your opponent's like, hoo, this Witch Enchanter looking real spicy, and things are going to go very poorly for you. But, I do think the card itself is fine. I would mostly ignore that 6 mana mode. It came up when I was playing the Pixie deck in Constructed. It actually came up quite a bit where you would create loops with this card, but that mostly had to do with the interaction between 2 of these and this town ain't big enough. It required quite a bit going on, and it was mostly in matchups, like you said, that you and your opponent were just like doomblading each other to death. I think for the purposes of Cube, you should probably view this as a 1/1 prowess for 1 that triggers your other prowess effects and then has a little bit of value into the late game. And especially in a deck that could be presenting cards like Monstrous Rage or Lightning Bolt, this being able to buy back that extra damage could be very relevant. Especially like, for example, sometimes you get your green opponents to like 3 life or 2 life or whatever, and you just aren't going to be able to get through. And then sometimes the Storm Chaser's talent can provide you with that ability to buy back a burst lightning and point it at their dome.
Yeah, so I'm less confident that Storm Chaser's talent will be like an excellent card than I am Cori-Steel Cutter. Like the Steel Cutter's still fairly new too. Like it hasn't had a lot of testing time in our mainline cube.
Storm Chaser's talent has a constructed pedigree though.
It does, though. I will say most of that comes to the ability to like pick it up and replay it with things like the Pixie and This Town Ain't Big Enough. Like on its own, I don't think people are playing it in like. I don't know. Are people playing this in Blue Red Prowess?
I think it's a 4 of in the Izzet Prowess deck. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I might be wrong about that. I can see. I mean, you see the interplay between all this stuff, right? Slick Shot Show Off, Cori-Steel Cutter, Storm Chaser's talent. Like I can't overstate how important it is that the Steel Cutter and the talent are non-creature spells that produce prowess creatures. It just makes the whole package of cards come together very, very well. So
I just confirmed it is a 4 of in pretty much all the lists.
Okay, then yeah, I guess just merit of putting a 1/1 prowess on board is good enough with some late game utility. My understanding is people were putting it in the Pixie deck mostly as something to pick up with Pixie. Just to produce extra bodies and have targets for This Town Ain't Big Enough. But if it's seeing play on its own, then I'm happy to hear that too, because I just really like the card. That was where we were at in Bloomburrow. Is like, this is a very cool card, but probably isn't for us. But I think now that over the course of the last 6 months, we've kind of shifted towards a very defined blue-red prowess style archetype that Storm Chaser's talent has a home now, and we're going to test it out. I can't say that. I actually don't know that we fired off with the card yet. It's a very new edition, so I'm hopeful of it. I am a little skeptical, but I am hopeful of the Storm Chaser's talent. Do you think people are going to do any sort of time walk things with it? It's one of the few cards we have that can actually pick up an instant or sorcery out of a graveyard.
That's pretty spicy, right? You time warp and then you get to pick it right back up and do it again on a future turn. I mean, that's pretty good, but I don't know. Problem with time warp is it tends to be better in slightly bigger decks. Like, you don't really, even though Time Warp is conceivably good in these Prowess decks, because, you get a bunch of free turns for damage, I tend to like it better in my Control-y or like the more Bant cocaine style decks where you're actually playing up the curve. I don't necessarily know if you want to have like a wall of 1s and 2s and then play a 5-drop, even if it is a potentially very good 5-drop. I think you'd rather just have your curve be lower.
Because the problem with Time Warp in these Prowess decks is, like, Time Warp is your turn usually, and then, like, if you're using all your mana to Time Warp, like, how are you getting your opponent's blockers out of the way for the turn? You're probably not, so.
Yeah, you already have to have good attacks. It's kind of win more in the Prowess decks, right? You already have to have good attacks in order to get good attacks off the Time Warp.
You know what I will say, like, really overperformed for me in that Izzet deck I played recently was Sunder and Eruption, the MDFC that destroys a land and makes all your opponent's non-flyers unable to block. Like, that's a closer for a Prowess deck. If your opponent thinks that they're, like, green chunky beefers are going to stop you, you just Sunder and Eruption them, you get some Prowess triggers, and they can't block for the turn.
Yeah, we've had some eyebrows raised about that card. I think people thought we put it in as a land destruction card, as like a card to hose people's mana. It's good. And it's just a good card. Yeah, the shout out to Danelius for selling us on this. It's been a very, very powerful card in this more powerful, like higher level environment. A lot of times, like the green decks will just be like, haha, I have infinite blockers, and then you're just like, what if you died instead?
Yeah, I do think it's less important in Peasant, where a lot of your red removal just kills a lot of the things that get in your way, but for green, like, the chunkiness goes down the curve a lot, so like your opponent will play a stabilizing green creature on turn 3 instead of turn 6 or something like that, so having something like Sunder and Eruption to get around that I think is quite nice. He's a champion of that in Peasant Cube too, as a way to just make sure red can end the game without like falling into like hell territory where there's literally no way that nothing they can top deck to get out of certain situations. So
yeah, and for here we like that here in this more powerful environment because of the bigger butts and stuff. But also, like, the argument too is that the delta between this card versus a basic land, it's basically like the best value card you can put into a cube because it's a game winner or it's a land, and the delta between that versus like drawing a mountain in the late game is huge. And I generally agree with that. Like, obviously, if you need to play this untapped, it's a little costly, but if you're an aggressive deck, it might not matter.
Closing out our conversation here, I wanted to touch on some non-Izzet cards, the Izzet cards that aren't actually like blue-red cards, and this is mostly just like the white package of cards that we got from Strixhaven and some old Prowess creatures. I wanted to touch on this just real quick because it is something that I kind of want to see more of in the future. Is like, I know Izzet spells every day, all day, every set. I like the idea of other decks reaching into the spells territory. In fact, I think we saw a Final Fantasy spoiler of like Garland or something that was like a red-black creature that let you surveil when you cast non-creature spells. It was kind of like a Dragon Rage channeler text. And I know Danelius is really excited about that one for Peasant Cubes. I would like to see other colors branching a little bit more into non-creatures matter territory. And white has done this a little bit. White is like the tertiary prowess color, but I don't feel like they've ever really delivered on that outside of Khans of Tarkir, original Khans block, with like Seeker of the Way, Monastery Mentor, and then Strixhaven had a few cards that touched on this with like Clever Lumimancer and Leonin Light Scribe. And these are all cards that I think play really well. You can do like blue-white prowess, but I want to see more of this. I want to see white especially play into the spells package a little bit more.
Yeah, and especially with those cards, it runs into the problem of those cards were coded as Magecraft, so they only worked with instants or sorceries, which is doubly awkward when you consider that we currently run 7 instants and sorceries in white. There's, a ton of non-creature spells. There's 16 artifacts and enchantments that would trigger prowess, but there's so few cards that actually trigger actual instant and actual sorcery.
Yeah, I think I would be way more interested in something like Leonin Light Scribe if you could trigger it with your Mishra's Baubles, obviously, but it doesn't do that. And I mean, we are getting a return to Arcavio/Strixhaven in 2026, but it's not even clear how much they're going to focus on like Strixhaven proper. So maybe we'll get some white spells matters cards necessary. I don't necessarily need to see this in green. Like, green is already the color that feels like it can do everything. Same with black to some extent, but I do like Sedgemoor Witch. I like the design of the card. I wish it was just a slight bit more playable. So this is all to say that I would like to see the kind of spells territory not just be Izzet like every single time. I would like to see a little bit more branching out. DMU, I think, was the last time I really feel like they touched on this with like the Wrath, the blue-white Wrath that lets you tap creatures when you cast a non-creature spell to draw, and then there was like a really bad Kennerid, whatever that card was.
Wrath has become my favorite commander deck. I'm a big fan of that card.
Yeah, I like that sort of stuff in blue-white as well. I think that's a very natural home. And it would kind of tie like the whole Jeskai package together, right? With, you know, your Quintorius Lore Master and your Narset, the exiled Narset from March of the Machine Aftermath and stuff like that. So this is all just a little tiny section to say, hey, Tim wants more white prowess type cards, or literally just spells. White prowess creatures. Yeah, yes. Quick question, this just popped in my head. It's something that I really want to try in the Peasant Cube, but maybe there's a home for it in like the mainline cube. What do you think of the card Rally the Monastery? That's the 4-mana modal card that costs 2 less if you've cast another spell, and then it has the modes of like make 2 1/1 prowess creatures, or give 2 creatures +2/2, or destroy a creature with power 4 or greater.
It feels very much like a peasant card. I have to imagine that card's not efficient enough for the main line.
Probably not. The thing being, if I feel like if it was a blue, wouldn't have these modes on it, but if it was a blue card or if it was a red card, I feel like it could be a lot stronger, because you just 2 1/1 prowess monks is, I think, a good deal stronger than it reads.
Yeah, if it was like red and did the same thing but made 2 prowess monks, maybe dealt 4 damage to a creature or 3 damage to a creature, and then had
if it did red things instead of white things as the alternative modes. But because we saw, what was it, Goblin Wizardry is 4-mana instant that makes 2 1/1 prowess. Like, that's obviously not a good enough card at all. But being able to like rattle off some spells, get 2 1/1 prowesses for 2 mana with some other modality, and then go from there seems pretty strong. It's just being in white doesn't feel like it's appropriate for that card for our mainline cube. Maybe at Peasant Cube. I think the raw power of the card is good enough at Peasant Cube. I think I agree it's not quite there for the mainline.
Yeah, so yeah, these I would really like to see a 2020X Appropriate Sedgemoor, which that's a card I really liked, and it's just not there on power. But yeah, these white, I think for the purposes of our cube, getting more of these tertiary white cards in that prowess space would be really nice.
So I guess to kind of wrap up the conversation here, Izzet spells is just like an easy thing to support in basically any cube that's not pushing like high power, like literal powered vintage cube or something like that. If you're playing even something, you know, fairly powerful like a modern cube, there's just so much support for Izzet spells throughout the years and throughout all the different limited formats that have had that as like the hallmark archetype for blue-red, that like you're just going to have a spells component. And I think the Prowess Edge is a really interesting way to push things, especially if you're one of those people who, you know, was like us, you know, many years ago, who was towing the line between having blue-red aggro burn and blue-red control kind of occupying the same space. If you want to kind of like compartmentalize everything into one Izzet deck, I like the idea of the Prowess deck, especially given the way that the red Prowess creatures bleed over into other archetypes. It makes it a lot less parasitic than playing things like your young Pyromancers and your Kenris Spell Spears and stuff like that. I guess Spell Spear kind of fits the conversation we're talking about here, but it's a little bit clunkier of a card for higher power levels.
Now, it does remain to see, like, is it good?
Yeah.
One card, I do want to shout one more card that I forgot to talk about when we were talking about the role player section, but I do think Brazen Borrower, if you can manage the mana, is like super good in these decks.
Yeah, I mean, Izzet Prowess is the best home for bounce spells, and
yeah, also just
Brazen
gives you
Borrower's
like gives you that tempo play in the early game, and then gives you like an evasive threat to close the game. But yeah, I think this is a deck that is really hype, even if it's not a deck that always does the best. It's not a deck that 3-0s as much as some of the other ones, but I think it's one of the more fun decks to play, just because your nut draws, like your really good draws in Izzet, are just they're kind of wild. They feel unfair when your opponent just is kind of on a slow clunker of a draw, and you just kind of are, you know, you've got like 5 triggers on the stack, and you know, it just feels really good.
Yeah, and one thing you can do too is there's a lot of room to like sideboard with these sorts of things. You can build a sideboard towards like trying to change your game plan on the draw or against a control deck. This is where things like your Gustal Thrill Rollers and stuff like that really come into play, is because anytime you present a Prowess deck, and like you stomp someone in game one, what are they going to do in sideboard? They're going to bring in every piece of removal that they have, right? And then finding those sticky ways to kind of fight through removal, like your Thrill Rollers and your Detectives Phoenixes and your things that like come through, your Cori-Steel Cutters and stuff like that, things that give you value through removal can really change the game plan there, whereas just relying on the same 6 prowess creatures to kind of carry the game for you isn't going to work out quite as much in sideboard games. So it's part of the reason I really wanted to do this episode, is just to kind of gush about Cori-Steel Cutter, but also Storm Chaser's talent, and kind of like land on here's where I think we can, find improvements. Maybe there are other cards like that in the card pool too that just aren't coming to mind, like these Izzet coded like artifacts and enchantments that play into the prowess theme, but also like give you value against the removal piles. So if you're listening and you can think of other cards in the same vein, let us know and we'll take a look back at them. But yeah, I think this is a really sweet deck. It's super fun to play. It is a very hard deck to draft because it's one of those like checkbox decks where you need fix it. We didn't even mention this. You need your dual lands, right? You need to have blue and red mana usually on turn 1. So you need like your steam vents. You need at least 3 or 4 dual lands to kind of operate consistently. But you also need removal spells. You also need threats. You also need non-creature spells. You also need interaction. Like you have all these check boxes that you need to check off to make the deck really come together. And those personally are my favorite decks to draft. It's why I end up playing something like this very often, is I like checkbox style decks. But it has weaknesses. It has strengths, and I think the Steel Cutter, the talent, are like helping to improve some of the weaknesses.
Yeah, I think when we get them, because I assume inevitably we're going to get these cards, I think we're going to have an interesting conversation about the cards Mutagenic Growth and Gitaxian Probe. And I don't know where we're going to end up landing on that, because I suspect, if I were just guessing, Gitaxian Probe is probably one that we would end up at least considering, and Mutagenic Growth is likely one we would not, because one of the kind of unwritten or maybe explicit rules of our mainline cube is we don't run any of the cards that do stuff when you're tapped out, unless they're outside of Mishra's Bauble, which is cycling. And Gitaxian Probe's kind of in the same boat, where it's not actually impacting the board without help. But Mutagenic Growth being able to blow people out when you're tapped out might be a bridge too far.
The one kind of caveat to that is that Arena will give away that you have mutagenic growth, right?
Sure.
Presumably, like there'll be stops at every point, and your opponent will be able, a savvy opponent will be able to suss out that you have mutagenic growth.
They won't know though, because you'll have a Lava Dart in your graveyard, and that's actually what's giving you priority.
Oh my god, Lava Dart is a card I would love to pick up so much.
Yeah.
Probe feels to me like the type of card that I would love to play with, but I would loathe to have cast against me so much that maybe I don't really want Probe, but if we got Probe, it'd be like, man, we're supposed to play this.
Yeah, it's one of those cards too that I kind of am nervous about when we inevitably get it, because it's the kind of card that will spike the win rate of your best players. Because
it will, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like when your best players thought sees somebody, they just get a huge advantage, because not only do you get their best card, you get that information advantage on Thoughtseize is arguably the best part. To the point that actually one of our good players, Doug, has suggested replacing Mind Spike that we currently run with Duress, because he's like, even if I whiff, I would rather have the hand information than paying 2 life to draw a card. And I was a little against it, but the more I thought about it, it's like, yeah, that hand information might just be more valuable. Knowing what your opponent has is super powerful in a game of Magic.
Mm-hmm. We might actually get Probe sometime soon. I don't know if you saw the State of Arena address they did last month, but one of the listener questions that they got was like, what do you guys plan on doing about cards that are coded in spell books for alchemy cards but aren't actually craftable cards on Arena? And the guy kind of gave a hesitant well, we have a plan for that, but we can't talk about it type thing. And he basically said but people will be really excited to learn what we're going to do with that. So I believe Gitaxian Probe is already coded on Arena with one of the alchemy cards that makes a bunch of cantrips. So
can we just get Spellbook Anthology, all the cards that are
I'll pay gems for it.
Yeah.
You hear that, Watsy? I know you're listening. This is why, we're gonna get those white prowess creatures. We already put it out into the ether. Might as well get the Spellbook Anthology while we're at it too. Okay, I mean that's gonna wrap us up here. I hope this has been good listening experience for people who are like maybe trying to find something unique to do with their Izzet sections that isn't just like a bunch of young pyromancers. Izzet Prowess is definitely something you can do. Remember, you can find us on Twitter at JankDiverGaming, youtube.com/JankDiverGaming, and find Teld streaming on twitch.tv/Teld Talks, TELD Talks. We've got big Final Fantasy spoilers coming up this weekend from PAX East. And then I don't think we'll have a full reveal of the set by the time we get to our next episode, but I'm guessing by the time we get to the episode after that, we might be back into reviews for Final Fantasy stuff. So I would expect one more kind of cube-related, just off-brand topic, and then we'll have some Final Fantasy reviews, which we're getting pretty stoked about. So that's the game plan. Until then, to the listener, as always, thanks for listening, and we will catch you all next time. I mentioned I wanted to talk about blueprints or video games or whatever at the end of this episode.
Just don't give me any spoilers.
Yes, that was gonna. That's what I was gonna ask first off. Is like, have you engaged with the game at all? I know you mentioned like wanting to play it a little.
I have played 2 runs and still confused. I've done 2 runs. I've kind of made my way through the house a little bit and then ran out of rooms and. Then I got hooked on other stuff. But Blueprints is in my Game Pass install list. Like it's installed on my computer. I'm gonna get back to it and play it at some point. So yeah, if you could avoid spoilers, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, I will give the spoiler-free version of what I'm gonna say here for you and also the listener. It's the type of game that you do not want people to spoil things. I mentioned last year Tunic. Right, and how Tunic had these like surprise moments where it was like these aha moments you don't get in video games that often anymore, and Blueprints is like that to the max. Like everything is an aha moment. So to the listener, if you haven't heard about this game somehow yet, the concept is that you play as a character who has inherited an estate from like a presumably really wealthy person, and they are giving you the estate under the condition that you find the 46th room in their mansion that has only 45 rooms in it. That's kind of the premise. And it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting as far as the story goes. Gameplay wise, it is a roguelike puzzle game. And the game takes place, or majority of the game takes place on a 5x9 grid where you start on one end of the grid and you draft rooms to kind of like unlock the squares on a grid. So every time you're in a room, you have some options for other rooms adjacent to it, and you can like interact with the doors and draft a new room to go into. And those rooms will often have puzzles in them or like meta clues to other stuff like that. And you spend the first 10-ish days. I probably got 10 days into the game kind of wondering like where's the hype? Like, why is this game so hyped up? Like, it starts off very slow, feeling like, okay, I'm learning things, but I don't really get, like, where the excitement factor is coming from. And then, like, once you start digging into it, it does, like, some really mind-boggling stuff. And again, no spoilers, but there are layers upon layers upon layers of not just, like, obvious puzzles, like, here, solve this dartboard puzzle or solve this, like, lockbox puzzle, but like the meta puzzles that take place across like different days and different rooms and interactions between different rooms and stuff like that are just kind of crazy when you think about the amount of work that went into it. Which, by the way, shout out to I should probably look up their name, but the game was designed by the person who runs mythicspoiler.com. Which is awesome. That was kind of a small selling point to get me to like try the game in the first time. You're like, oh, Magic community person and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But the gameplay presents these really interesting scenarios where obviously you're drafting from a pool of rooms, and whenever a room leads to a dead end, that's bad news. It means you can't progress, right? And at the end of the day, when you run out of resources or you run out of like you've hit too many dead ends and you can't add any more rooms, you restart and everything starts over, and it's a roguelike, so like the rooms are different from day to day. But sometimes you'll be presented with a choice where it's like, okay, I'm drafting a room. I can pick a room that has 3 hallways and lets me extend off into different directions, but doesn't really have any benefits beyond that. Or I can pick a room that I've never seen before that might have clues on how to solve a puzzle from a different room that I've seen. And then you'll get into things like, oh, putting this hallway in this position on this day allows other things to trigger in other areas, but I have to find those rooms and draft them for the day. Like, there's so many cool things that you unlock and like add to the game as you're playing them beyond what you just see. Like, if you watched a trailer for this game, it's going to be like, hey, draft some rooms and build a mansion. And then you'll play the game and do a couple runs and be like, yeah, I drafted some rooms and didn't really get anywhere and restarted a couple times. And it's like, okay, where are we going with this? And then you just get these, like, you get these clues that'll be like, here's how you do this thing in that other room. And then you go do the thing and it unlocks all these other things that like kind of spiral into like this constant stream of unlocking stuff. And I'm only on like day 30 something. I know Mop is on like day 100. He's played like a ton of it. But, like, just the amount of stuff and the depth to the game has been, like, very refreshing and very exciting to play. Once you get to, like, the first big discovery or two, you'll be like, okay, I see where this is going. And then it just keeps building on itself over and over and over. So it goes beyond its initial premise of just, like, draft rooms and find the end of the mansion or something like that. And I highly recommend it to anybody who enjoys puzzle-based games. The roguelike elements are secondary to all the like puzzle solving and stuff like that. So if you're not a puzzle game person, you won't enjoy this game. But if you like kind of like mystery solving or, you know, clue based stuff, I think this is definitely a game to check out. It's very easy to play. It's very stress free too. Like, it's not combat related or anything like that. So just a nice little like mind twister style game that has a lot of variability because of the roguelike elements. It just feels like very well put together, very thought out. Obviously, this guy has been working on this game for like 10 years or something like that. So I've been very happy with it. It's probably going to go down as like my favorite game of the year. And I just highly recommend it to anybody. And Teld, I would say if you are experiencing the like, I don't know where this is going type thing, like for the first couple runs, like I felt the same thing too. And it took me a little bit to get to kind of like the big moments that like unfolded the game into like what it actually is.
Okay, yeah, I'll keep that in mind. I've been interested in it, but I haven't really sat down to grind into it. I've got school ending here in the next couple of weeks, and so at that point, I'll have a little more free time to really invest in some of these games that require, you know, a little more time out of you. Like, one of the nice things, like I mentioned with Oblivion, is it's really easy to just like sit around and play it for a few minutes and then dip out.
Yeah. Man, I remember the teacher days when you actually get off of it. You're like, hey, I have freedom. I can play some games.
Yeah.
But yeah, to the listener, check out Blueprints. It's like a passion project for someone, and it's a very intelligently put together game, is what I'll say, with a lot of like discoveries and aha moments and like things that I haven't really experienced in video games as much as of late. So I would check it out. It's free on Game Pass. Yeah,
the comparison to a game like Tunic with the aha moments is definitely a big selling, like a big endorsement, because we both, I think, fell in love with that game pretty hard.
Yeah, Tunic was great.